My name is Jack Carter, and I've always believed that a man's ranch should be his sanctuary, a slice of unbridled freedom far removed from the suffocating clutches of modern society. I bought my sprawling ranch in the outskirts, a place where the horizon stretched endlessly and the only interruptions to my peace were the gentle neighing of horses and the rustle of wind through cornfields. I envisioned days spent riding horses, tending to my crops, and basking in the tranquility of nature. Little did I know that my dream of rural serenity would soon be hijacked by a group of self-appointed community enforcers with an entitlement problem the size of a small city. The ranch I purchased wasn't just any patch of land, it was my personal kingdom, a piece of freedom in a world that increasingly felt like it was under siege by rules and red tape. For years, this land had been a quiet haven, with only a few like-minded neighbors dotting the countryside. But in recent times, a wave of suburban development rolled in like an invading force. One by one, new houses popped up, and soon enough, the area began to resemble a mini-suburb rather than the open, sprawling farmland it once was. Then came the HOA, the homeowners association that none of us had ever really asked for. Somehow, a motley crew of local residents banded together, armed with their glossy brochures and a superior sense of entitlement, to form an organization meant to protect our neighborhood's values. I naturally wasn't even asked if I wanted to join. It was like they assumed everyone automatically signed up for the self-righteous club the moment a picket fence was installed. And as I soon found out, their vision of community was far removed from the concept of respecting individual property rights. One seemingly ordinary morning, I received a letter that would upend the very fabric of my existence on this land. The envelope was official-looking, complete with the HOA's crest, an emblem I'd come to loathe almost as much as their patronizing newsletters. I tore it open, expecting some bureaucratic request to trim my hedges or repaint my barn in community-approved colors. Instead, I read that my beloved ranch had been unceremoniously declared community land. According to their declaration, this meant that every resident within the HOA boundaries now had free, unrestricted access to my property. At first, I laughed it off. I mean, come on, declaring someone else's property community land? It sounded like a twisted joke. But as the days passed, I realized this wasn't some isolated administrative error. It was a deliberate, absurd overreach into my private life. I started noticing subtle changes, neighbors casually strolling through my fields, kids scaling my fences as if my ranch were a public playground, and groups setting up impromptu barbecues right next to my favorite grazing spots. The sense of violation was palpable. I'd always prided myself on my self-reliance and respect for personal boundaries, qualities that now seemed to be in direct conflict with this invasive community mindset. One afternoon, while I was out checking on the horses, I saw a couple of families picnicking by the pond. They had even set up a makeshift tent and were firing up a grill. At first, I thought maybe they were just being friendly neighbors, but when I asked one of them if they had permission to be there, I was met with a nonchalant shrug and a remark about the community's rights. I tried reasoning with the situation. I reached out to the HOA, expecting a conversation where I could calmly explain that the ranch was my private property, a sanctuary I had invested my blood, sweat, and tears into building. Instead, I was met with a tone of condescension and an unyielding insistence that since the majority of residents were now stakeholders in the land, my personal rights were secondary to the collective good. It wasn't just a matter of property lines, it was an affront to my identity as someone who had worked hard for every inch of that land. The more I thought about it, the more enraged I became. I remember sitting on my porch one early morning, the sun barely cresting the horizon, and feeling an overwhelming sense of betrayal. This wasn't just about trespassing or inconvenience, it was about the erosion of my right to decide how my land was used. I had built this ranch with my own hands, nurtured it from barren soil into a thriving ecosystem, and now, out of nowhere, a bunch of entitled neighbors were waving their authority like a hall pass, demanding entry whenever they pleased. It wasn't long before I started witnessing even bolder transgressions. I'd catch glimpses of well-dressed individuals casually strolling through my property as if the idea of a no trespassing sign was an afterthought. At times, I'd see a group of teenagers having a laugh as they darted past the barn, seemingly oblivious to the fact that they were trespassing on someone's private property. And then there were the family gatherings. What started as innocent barbecues quickly morphed into full-blown parties with loud music, excessive littering, and a complete disregard for any semblance of order or respect. In one particularly frustrating encounter, I watched from my window as a neighbor's dog, unleashed and running wild, chased after a flock of chickens I'd painstakingly raised for their eggs. The dog's owner, seemingly unaware or indifferent to the chaos, waved at me with a self-satisfied smile as if to say, "It's all good because it's community land now." The word community had become a weapon in their lexicon, a means to justify their blatant disregard for personal property and mutual respect. By now, it was clear that the HOA's declaration wasn't just a bureaucratic error, it was a calculated move by a group of entitled individuals who believed that the community's rights trumped those of the individual. They had taken it upon themselves to rewrite the rules of engagement in our once peaceful rural haven. Their entitlement was not subtle, it was brazen and invasive, a constant reminder that, in their eyes, my hard-fought independence was up for negotiation. This initial phase of the conflict left me reeling. The tranquility I had so carefully cultivated was being shattered by a tide of thoughtless entitlement and unchecked power. As I sat there, grappling with the reality of the situation, I couldn't help but feel that my sacred bond with the land was being desecrated. The ranch, my lifelong dream and escape from the suffocating demands of society, was now under siege by those who thought that communal rights were more important than personal achievement and hard work. I knew that something had to be done. The idea that someone could unilaterally decide that my property was theirs to use was not just absurd, it was a fundamental violation of everything I stood for. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the only way to reclaim my sanctuary was to confront this wave of entitlement head-on. And so, with a heavy heart but a steely resolve, I began to prepare for the battle that lay ahead, determined to defend not just my land, but my right to live free from arbitrary dictates. At first, I tried to be civil. Really, I did. I wasn't some trigger-happy cowboy looking to start a war with my neighbors. I just wanted my ranch, the land I had worked so hard for, to remain exactly what it was, mine. So, like any reasonable person, I reached out to the HOA to clear up this ridiculous misunderstanding. Maybe they had sent the letter to the wrong person? Maybe there was some legal loophole that had accidentally classified my land as communal? I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. I wanted to believe that common sense would prevail. I was wrong. I showed up to an HOA meeting, a necessary evil I had never attended before. As I walked into the neighborhood clubhouse, a place I had no interest in belonging to, I was met with the self-righteous stares of people who clearly had nothing better to do with their time than micromanage the lives of others. At the head of the table sat Patricia Lewis, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a woman who exuded the kind of bureaucratic arrogance you'd expect from someone who had never heard the word no in her life. She greeted me with a condescending smile that immediately set my blood boiling. "Ah, Mr. Carter," she said, flipping through a stack of papers as if she had more important things to do than deal with me. "We were wondering when you'd finally decide to cooperate." "Cooperate? Cooperate?" I kept my cool. "Look, Patricia." "That's Mrs. Lewis," she interrupted, her smile tightening. "Oh, this was going to be fun." I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Lewis," I continued through gritted teeth, "I received a letter stating that my ranch is now considered community land. That must be a mistake, because, as you and everyone else here should be well aware, I bought that land myself. I pay for the upkeep. I pay the taxes. It is not, under any legal definition, public property." Patricia sighed as if I were an insolent child who just didn't get it. "Mr. Carter, your land is quite large, and you don't seem to be using all of it. Our community is growing, and we believe that it would be in the best interest of everyone if a portion of your land were designated as a shared recreational space. Think of it as a park. It's really a wonderful opportunity to contribute to the neighborhood." I nearly choked on my own rage. "Contribute?" I echoed. "You're talking about stealing my property and pretending it's some kind of community service project." Patricia gave a laugh, the type of fake, diplomatic laugh that made me want to flip the entire table over. "Now, Mr. Carter, let's not be dramatic. The HOA voted on this and the majority agreed that your land should be made accessible to the neighborhood." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Surely she couldn't be serious. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly, my hands clenching into fists. "A group of people who don't own my land got together and decided that they do?" "Well," she said, flipping through her papers, "we do have jurisdiction over community zoning." I leaned forward. "I don't live in your damn HOA." That made her pause. For a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Well, the HOA has extended its jurisdiction to include your property," she said carefully, choosing her words like a politician avoiding a scandal. "It's a formality, really, but it allows us to manage the space more effectively." I had heard enough. I stood up. "Let me be very clear, if I catch anyone on my land without my permission, I will treat them as trespassers." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the room. Patricia smiled again, though this time it was colder. That would be a very unneighborly attitude, Mr. Carter. I didn't even bother responding. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. If I thought the meeting was the worst of it, I was sorely mistaken. Within days, it became clear that these people had no intention of backing down. People started cutting through my fields as if they were public walkways. Families had picnics on my property, leaving behind trash, beer cans, and broken lawn chairs. Some entitled parents let their kids chase my horses, which could have ended horribly for both the kids and the animals. A group of teenagers took it upon themselves to have a bonfire on my land. Someone actually stole my eggs and vegetables from my small farm stand, leaving behind a smug little note, "Thanks for sharing with the community, smiley face." The worst part? When I confronted these people, their response was always some variation of, "But Patricia said we could." I started calling the police, but each time I got the same useless response, "This sounds like a civil dispute, sir. You might have to take it up with the HOA or file a case in small claims court." So that was their game. The HOA knew damn well that if they stalled long enough, people would start treating my land as if it had always been communal. It would become normal to ignore my property rights. If I didn't do something fast, my ranch would be permanently overrun by these suburban squatters. I realized that the law wasn't going to save me anytime soon. I had to take matters into my own hands. First, I installed fences, not just flimsy wooden ones, but tall, barbed wire fences with clear, "No trespassing" signs posted every few feet. Then I set up security cameras. If these people were going to act like entitled morons, I was going to document every single violation and build a solid case. And finally? Well, let's just say I had one last trick up my sleeve, something that would make sure these trespassers would never think about stepping foot on my land again. Because if the HOA wanted a fight, they were about to get one. The first order of business? Fortifications. I installed a brand new electrified fence around my entire property. Not the lethal kind, obviously. I wasn't trying to actually hurt anyone, as tempting as that might have been. But it was strong enough to give an unpleasant jolt to anyone who thought they could waltz onto my land like it was some community park. Every few feet, I posted bright yellow warning signs that read, "Electrified fence, private property, trespass at your own risk." I even installed security cameras at key points around the ranch, all connected to my phone. If any of these entitled fools tried anything, I'd have crystal clear evidence to throw back in their faces. And then came my favorite part of the plan. Some people buy guard dogs to protect their property. That would have been the normal thing to do. But I wasn't interested in normal. Instead, I introduced a new security team to the ranch. A flock of aggressive geese. Yes, you read that right. These weren't your average, cute little pond geese. These were mean, territorial monsters with beady, soulless eyes and a vendetta against anything that moved. Anyone who's ever encountered an angry goose knows they don't mess around. A herd of warrior goats. These weren't just any goats. These were hyperactive, headbutting, fence-ramming little maniacs. They had one job: attack anything unfamiliar. I even named one of them Patricia after the HOA president. It felt poetic. The first couple of days after installing the fence were quiet. Too quiet. I knew it wouldn't last. Sure enough, on the third day, Patricia and her minions showed up in my driveway, arms crossed, faces full of righteous suburban fury. "Mr. Carter," Patricia said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "This fence is a dangerous addition to our community." I leaned against my porch railing and sipped my coffee. "That's funny," I said, "because this isn't your community. This is my land." She gave me the kind of forced smile that people give when they're trying not to scream. "We've received numerous complaints about the fence. Parents are worried about their children's safety." I raised an eyebrow. Maybe they should teach their kids not to trespass? Her eye twitched. "Mr. Carter, this is not acceptable. We're demanding that you remove the fence immediately." I pretended to think about it. "No." A man behind Patricia, probably her husband, stepped forward. "We're prepared to take legal action." I laughed. Right in his face. "Please do. I'd love to see how a judge reacts when you tell them you want to sue me for putting a fence around my own property." Patricia huffed, clearly realizing she wasn't getting anywhere. "This isn't over," she snapped, before turning on her heel and marching away with her little HOA army. Later that evening, I got an alert on my phone. Motion detected. I pulled up the security camera feed, and what did I see? 3 neighborhood idiots standing by the fence with wire cutters. Oh, this was going to be good. I watched as one of them, a guy named Greg, one of Patricia's biggest supporters, reached forward and snipped the fence. Greg let out a high-pitched scream and stumbled back, shaking his hand like a cartoon character who just stuck a fork in a toaster. His 2 friends, Karen and Steve, started panicking. "Oh my god, Greg, are you okay?" Greg, now furious, tried to play it off. It's not that bad," he muttered, even though he was visibly trembling. Then, in what can only be described as a truly idiotic decision, Karen grabbed a wooden stick and tried to push the fence down. She yelped and fell backward into a pile of goat poop. At that moment, my geese noticed the commotion. And let me tell you, they were not happy. With an ear-piercing honk, the whole flock charged. Greg, Karen, and Steve had two options: try climbing the fence and get electrocuted again, or they can run. They chose to run. Screaming at the top of their lungs, they took off down the road, the angry geese in full pursuit. I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. The next day, I got another letter from the HOA. Subject: urgent, dangerous structures on community property. The letter was full of legal-sounding nonsense about how my fence was a safety hazard and how my geese were aggressive animals that posed a community threat. I wrote back a simple response: "Dear HOA, my land is not community property. My fence is on my land. My geese don't like trespassers. If anyone tries to destroy my property again, I'll press charges." After the geese incident, the trespassing stopped. No more random barbecues. No more stolen eggs. No more people treating my land like their personal playground. Word spread that my property was a no-go zone. As for Patricia? Well, let's just say she started avoiding me in public. Maybe it was because she knew I had footage of her little fence-cutting crew. Or maybe she just couldn't handle the humiliation of admitting defeat. Either way, I had one. And my ranch? It was finally mine again.